In this video, we're going to discuss blocks and indentation in Python. You may have noticed that in examples where we use a function or a loop that we indent the body. And you may have even heard someone refer to a section of code as a block of code. It turns out that Python depends heavily on these two concepts, blocks and indentation. And without them, the language would not function as it currently does. So first, let us define block. A block is a piece of Python program text that is executed as a unit. Some examples of blocks are listed in the text here. A block is a body or lines of code that are associated with a loop or an if statement, for example, both of which we're going to see in the next few sections. Some other examples include the code that makes up a class definition or a module. If you recall from the examples we did in the calculator notebook, we imported the math module so that we could use certain functions like square root. So you can see from this that blocks can actually be nested. That is, the function bodies or blocks reside within the block that makes up the module. Now, it may not be immediately clear why we need this definition, but we're going to use this definition when we discuss indentation next. And then in later sections, understanding what a block is will be very helpful for you to understand name resolution and scoping rules. Now, Python doesn't use special characters to separate or denote blocks. In other languages like C++, curly braces are used to wrap the bodies of its functions and classes and so forth, therefore separating their blocks. Python actually uses indentation to do this, and it depends on consistent indentation to denote a block. For example, in the text here, we have a function definition, which is creatively named func. The block that makes up the body of this function is indented by 4 spaces. And so the interpreter knows that all statements, 1, 2, and 3 here, make up the body of func because they're all indented by the same number of spaces. It doesn't actually matter that there's a blank line here separating statement 2 and 3 because each of these statements has the same indentation, and the interpreter will therefore assume that they are meant to be part of the same block. Statement 4 does not have the same indentation, and so it will not be included in the block for our function. Now, a few points. PEP8 recommends that 4 spaces are used to indent a block. It states further that tabs should not be used since tab stops can be modified by various editors, which can lead to hard-to-read code. Or, in the event that you're using an editor that automatically replaces tabs with some number of spaces, this can actually lead to new blocks being formed. Say, if a tab stop is automatically replaced by a number of spaces different than that used to indent the blocks. Second, while PEP8 recommends 4 spaces, the interpreter is much more flexible than that. You can actually use any number of spaces to indent as long as that number is consistent within a block. Now notice I didn't say consistent everywhere. The interpreter only looks for a change in indentation and therefore doesn't care if one uses 2 spaces for the indentation of one block and 4 spaces for the indentation of another. That being said, please be consistent. It makes things much easier to read and follow if a consistent indentation is used. Now last, PEP8 also recommends that blocks are separated by blank lines, as we have here between statements 3 and 4. Again, this is not a requirement by the interpreter. This is a guideline put forth by PEP8 for readability, and is certainly recommended.